did you have any idea they were working on this kind of stuff?
Hey, I know it was kind of cheap of me to lure you into that last video and not even show you how to make what I showed in the thumbnail, but good news, that's all we're doing today. We're just going straight into the making shit part, okay? No memes today, no fun, no goofs, none of that. No fun allowed. I cut all that out, otherwise the video would be like 6 hours long. No one wants to watch a 6-hour long YouTube video, right? So, yeah, I just wanted to apologize real quick if I seem somewhat low energy throughout parts of this. And that's because this is like my 6th time trying to record this. I had to scrap like 8 hours of footage because I didn't really like what I ended up with. But I think we got it. So, yeah, enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be doing some 3D modeling today. But before we start, I'm going to need you to do one thing. Open a new tab in your browser right now, type in N64 controller, go into images, download a couple of reference photos. We need one specifically that is taken from the top. Now, go into Blender, create a new general file, press A, delete everything, open File Explorer in another window, and now take those images and just drag and drop them into the software. I got these two right here. I'm going to hide this one by pressing H. I'm going to click on this one. I'm going to press Alt-R and then Alt-G to reset its rotation and position. And now we can almost start modeling. We just need to align this image so that the center of the controller is aligned with the Y-axis, the green line here. I'll just save this file real quick, and throughout this tutorial you might see me compulsively pressing Ctrl S every now and again. It's just muscle memory at this point. Anyways, Shift A, we're going to add a cube. This is going to be our base mesh. I'll just rename this in the outliner to controller, and now tab to go into edit mode. We are going to split this cube in half. I'm going to press Ctrl and R. This is going to add a loop cut going across the whole center. Press left click and then right click to reset its position. And now if I go into face select mode up here, we're going to be switching between these. I'll select this face and then all these faces by pressing Shift Alt left click, delete faces, and now I can go into the modifiers tab over here, add a mirror modifier, make sure that's set to the x-axis, and one more thing, just so that these two do not intersect in this way, enable clipping. We're modeling a symmetrical object and we only have to work on one side of it. Now I'm just going to scale this whole thing down. Press A to select everything, S and Z to scale on the Z axis. Move it up, G and Z. Scale it down a bit more. This seems okay. And now we're going to try to trace out a silhouette of this controller. So to do that very easily, we're going to go into top view by the Z icon up here. Now press Shift and Z to go into wireframe view. And this is going to make everything transparent and allow us to select vertices through each other. So if I use the box select, I can select all 4 vertices on this side. So that's how we're going to be working on this. Now select these vertices on the top, G and Y to move them on the Y axis. And we're just going to be aligning the corners with the actual controller. G and X to move on the X axis. This vertex corresponds to this corner, and these vertices align with the bottom edge of the main body. Now I'm going to select these vertices on the side. If I go out of top view and press Shift Z again, you're going to see a bit better what we are going. I'm going to press E to extrude, and as you can see, that adds more geometry for us to work with. I'll cancel this, go back into top view. So you just want to extrude this so that it lines up with the edge of this controller. Now you can see that the right side is a little misaligned. You know, it's never going to be perfect because we're working with a real photo here, right? There's going to be lens distortion, things like that. We are just eyeballing this thing, really. The reference is just that for us, a reference. Now, we are going to use that loop cut tool again to create a line going across the center of the controller. And we are going to try to line this up with the center of the D-pad. Create another one up here, and I want that to be lined up with the corner of this triangle up here. 2 things we need to keep in mind while we're doing this. The first thing, density. We don't want our geometry to be too dense because we're going to be subdividing it later. Basically, it would create some issues with shading and optimization. Another thing we need to keep in mind is the flow of geometry, which will make editing this whole thing a lot easier. So that's what we're going to be taking care of now. Select these vertices, and as I said, we're going to line them up with the corner of this triangle here. Now move these so that they sort of flow into each other. And then we're going to move this vertex just so that we can later extrude this downwards and create this center handle thing, whatever. And actually that's what we're going to do now. So just select these vertices, press E to extrude, move that down, and now we're going to just take these vertices, press G, and just move them in. And now as you can see, there's a bit of a subtle curve. Create that, we're just going to add 2 more edge loops. So Control R again, and now I'm going to scroll up on the scroll wheel once before pressing left click, right click. I'm going to select these vertices, G and X, move them left. And now we're essentially going to do the same thing up here. So just select these vertices, E to extrude, move them up, and then take these. I'm going to add 1 more edge loop going across the whole thing just to round this out. Control R like this, left click, right click. You can select these vertices and push them out on the y-axis. Just try to align these and just try to straighten these out a bit. Again, as I said, we don't have to be perfect here. Select these vertices, round this out as well. Maybe push these out. One more thing I'm going to add here. Control R. I'm going to add a loop cut going across here and just try to align that with the center of the D-pad. So first things first, Control R, left click, and then I'm going to right click, and now I want this to be perfectly flat. I'm going to scale this whole thing down on the x-axis, S, X, and I'm going to press 0, and now left click to confirm that. And now I think this D-pad in the photo is leaning to the left a little bit, so we're going to compensate for that. G, X, and I'm going to move it to the right, just about here I think. And now we're going to try to use these vertices to round out this shape of the body. Now we're going to be adjusting this a lot later, so don't worry about it too much for now. We just want it to be roughly aligned. We can move on to the side handles. The thing about these though is they're a bit lower than the rest of the body. So I'm going to move out of top view, move the camera, Shift Z to get out of wireframe view, and I'm going to press Control R. I'm going to create a loop cut going across the body like this. Left click, and now move it up just below the surface. Left click to confirm. Pretty good. Actually, I think I'm gonna scale this thing down on the Z-axis a bit more. So A, S, and Z. Sort of like this. And now I can go into face select mode, select these 2 faces, and we're going to extrude these to make the side handles. Go into top view again, E, and now Y to extrude that on the Y axis. Left click to confirm. Go into vertex select mode again, and now just adjust this shape to the photo. We can add 1 more loop cut here, left click and right click, just so that we can create this subtle curve that we have going on here. Maybe push these vertices out a bit more. And that is looking pretty good to me. Now we can start adding some shape to this. And we're going to begin by, first of all, hiding this reference image, because it's going to get in the way. I'm going to go into face select mode. I'm going to select these 4 faces, E to extrude, and pull them down just like this. And that's going to be our expansion pack module. Go into edge select mode. I'm going to select these edges going across the whole thing, G and Z, and just move them down like this. Now I'm going to go into face select mode again, pick this face, G and Z, and just move it, and maybe move it on the Y axis in this direction. Go to edge select mode, G and Z, pull this down, and we're going to do a similar thing to this one. Pull this down, go to edge select mode, pull this down as well, and then forget to pull this in. I'm going to go to vertex select mode. I'm going to pick these vertices, G and Y, pick these vertices, G and X, and just sort of pull this into the body of the controller. Pick these 2, G and Z, pick this one, do the same. Pick this vertex, maybe you can round this out a bit on the Y axis. Maybe pick this vertex, move it down as well. Pretty good. Pick this one, maybe move it down just a tad. We're not going to be doing too much work on this now, because as I said before, we're going to be adjusting it a lot later. You will see that the whole controller has a bit of a curve to it, and this is sort of flush with the rest of the body. So that's what we're going to try to replicate now. I'm going to use the knife tool to create this triangle here. K, I'm going to snap to this vertex, left click, I'm going to connect it to this one. Left click again, press enter to confirm, and now Shift and Z, I'm going to select this part of the mesh and just pull it down and rotate it on the y-axis. Now G, push it in. And now I'm also going to select these vertices here. Just press G and Z and pull it down slightly. Another thing we should make now is the Z button down here. I am just going to pick these vertices, G, Y, and just push them in. Now I'm going to use the knife tool one more time here. K, snap to this vertex, snap to this edge right here. Enter to confirm. And I want this to be flat on the y-axis, so I'm going to press S, Y, and 0. And I'm going to select these two vertices and pull them down. And in fact, I think we might want this to be a bit slimmer. So I'm going to select this vertex. I'm going to push it in on the x-axis. Let's see how that looks from a different angle. And now we are going to create this button in a very simple way. Just select this face. Now Shift and D is going to duplicate it. Now I'm going to press right click to reset its position. And now I'm going to push it in on the x-axis, and then S and Z to scale it down on the z-axis just a little, G and Y to push it back into this part. And now I'm going to press E, Y, extrude it, and now just adjust the shape. I'm going to go into edge select mode, G, Y, go into face mode, select this face, G and X. I'm going to make this just a little smaller. Now go to vertex select mode, we're going to make some minor adjustments. Press Ctrl R, we're going to add a curve here. Left click, right click, G and Y. Select this vertex, G, X. Do the same with these. Press L, that's going to select all the linked vertices so that we have the whole trigger selected. Now G, Y, and just push it back a little more. Now actually I forgot to do one somewhat important thing. So while we have this selected, I'm going to hide everything in the object by pressing Shift and H. Now going to face select mode, I'm going to scale these down on the y-axis 0, and now delete these two faces, and that's going to help us with some shading issues that would come up later. Actually, I think I might want to make this a bit smaller, so I will select this one more time, G and X, and now to show everything again, Alt H. And again, you can adjust this as you see fit. For example, I think I might want a bit more of a curve here, so I will select this vertex and this vertex, G, Z, move that up a bit more. And we're essentially going to be doing the same thing for the other knob buttons. So just in face mode, select these two faces. Again, Shift D to duplicate, right click to reset the position, and now scale that down, move it up on the Z axis a little bit, and then move it back into the controller, G, Y, and then extrude it out just like this. And now again, I do want to delete those faces inside, so L, Shift H, select these two and just delete them. Alt H, show everything. And now we're gonna leave modeling all the other buttons for later. Actually, get out of edit mode for a second. I'm gonna right click on this model and I'm gonna change the shading to auto smooth. And that's gonna smooth out some of these surfaces here, but it's still a little chunky, right? It's decisively low poly. So go into the modifier tab again and add a subdivision surface modifier. And this is going to add geometry to our mesh and just smooth the whole thing out. And we want to make sure that the levels viewport and in the render are consistent, because it will alleviate some issues later down the line when we're going to be drawing on this thing. I think 2 is pretty good. If you really want more geometry, you can go with 3. You may be seeing some shading issues here and there, and this is because the angle is just slightly too sharp to smooth out the shading. Now you can adjust this. If we go into Shade Auto Smooth again and click this menu down here, you can actually increase this angle. We could actually go up to 45. As you can see, because the whole mesh has been smoothed out, we don't really have a lot of definition left here, and that's what we will be trying to fix now by going into the edit mode again. I'm actually just going to click on this button so that we can see the topology a bit better. If I go into edge select mode, select any edge and press Shift and E and then drag my mouse to the right, you can see, if I turn off the overlays, you can see this a bit better, that we have created a bit of a crease here, and we're going to be using that to just sharpen up this whole thing. Selecting edges, holding Alt to select entire loops. Now, generally speaking, you want to avoid the value of 1 unless you've got like a really unnaturally sharp edge. For most intents and purposes, 0.4 works quite well, maybe more of a 0.5. Also, the way I generally like using this is just if I go into this menu here by pressing N, I can actually just control this value right here. These two edges right here, I think we might actually want to go with a 1, and also these ones right here I think might benefit from that, and just select this edge and crease this as well just to pull that in. This right here will be a little more subtle. I'll just go for 0.3. But here, this for example, this is going to be relatively sharp. Deselect these two actually and go with a 0.5 here as well. These I want to be perfectly flat, so I will go with a 1 and maybe this one too, but go with a 0.5 on these. Now I will outline the whole controller down here and again go with a 0.5, these two edges as well, and I might just want to sharpen 0.4 on these and these ones as well. And now the buttons, of course, just select all the corners and the edges and type in 0.4. I think these two, maybe like a 0.4 or 0.3, but that would be it for this part. Now we are just going to be adjusting this geometry again to fit with the reference image, and this is why I was saying we don't want to be spending too much time. So again, I will just go into top view, Shift Z to go into wireframe mode, and I am going to be selecting vertices, dragging them out, and just making sure that this is all lined up with the image. Now get out of top view, we're going to be selecting these and just dragging that down to add some curvature. Select this loop by pressing Alt, move it down as well. And this one just a little bit too. And select these three vertices, move them down. One more thing I forgot to model. There is a bit of an arch on the expansion pack. We really just need to take this vertex and push it up along with this one. Go into edge select mode, select these edges and crease these edges as well. And we can select these and just move them on the x-axis, G and X. Can do the same with these vertices. Just try to relax this. And at this stage of the tutorial we will no longer be needing the mirror modifier. So what I will do is apply it by clicking on this drop down menu here. Selecting apply. I will hide the visibility of the subdivision modifier just for a second, just so that I can see what I am doing a little bit better. I will take these two vertices, G and Y, move them up on the y-axis, just give myself a little bit of space. And what I will do right now is bevel this part of the mesh to create a circle where the D-pad will go. Now the bevel is usually used on edges to create this effect, but if you select a vertex, press Ctrl B and now V to change the mode, you can do the same with vertices. Now I will need a couple more vertices to round this out, so what I will do is select the knife tool with K. Hi, I left myself a note here to explain a couple of things. Basically, apart from just giving me more geometry to work with, what this does is it gets rid of n-gons on the mesh. Now, here's the thing. Generally speaking, it's considered good practice to avoid adding triangles to your mesh because they're really hard when it comes to editing. Loop cuts don't work on triangles. Subdivision doesn't work on triangles. So that's why we mostly work with polygons that have 4 corners, right? Quads. But what 3D software likes even less than triangles are n-gons, which are shapes that have more than 4 vertices, right? And this one right here has 5 of them. Now, in most cases, this doesn't really matter to me. I have a very, if it works kind of approach. I'm not a very technically minded guy, right? And I'm not a professional, so it doesn't matter. But in this case, it is very useful and it is good to know. And now I will just snap to this vertex, hold shift to snap to the center of this edge, right click to disconnect, create another cut right here, do the same thing for all these 4 corners. Like this. Go to edge select mode, select all the edges around this part. Jesus Christ, okay, I gotta pause this again because I'm about to use something that isn't actually in Blender by default. You see, I've been using this for so long that it's just become, you know, undisposable to me. But it's actually an add-on. Now, luckily, Blender actually includes some add-ons by default that you could just enable in a menu. So that's what I want you to do. You gotta go into Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and now here, make sure this is unchecked, look up Loop Tools, and just enable this checkmark here. I don't think you even have to reboot the program. It should just be enabled. Go into right-click, Loop Tools, and now select Circle. And just to alleviate any possible shading issues, I will use the knife tool to create a triangle fan. And now go into Top View, show the reference image we were using before again. And now I will adjust this so that it lines up with the picture a little better. And now to inset, we're going to make a new set of faces here, and we are going to move it down on the Z-axis. Select this whole loop by holding Alt and left click, and now do like a 0.3 mean crease. Show the subdivision surface modifier again just to see what that looks like. And I think we can go a bit higher, maybe to like a 0.4, maybe move this down just a bit more. Don't forget this vertex as well. And I think I might actually bump up the subdivision modifier to 3. Again, whatever value you go with, just remember to line up the levels viewport with the rendered levels. This option is for optimization so that the viewport runs faster, but you don't lose fidelity in the render. But when we're going to be working with grease pencil, sometimes you might have issues where in the viewport it seems like your strokes are not intersecting with the mesh, but when you render it out, they actually are. And that is, of course, a problem. Go back into edit mode. And now I am going to be adding in the buttons. We are only going to be making the A, B, and the C buttons, since the start button is actually flush with the body of the controller. We will just be drawing it on later. Actually, now that I am looking at this image, I think we could adjust this part of the controller a little bit. Maybe just take these vertices and move them down ever so slightly, just to get back on track. I will now press Shift and A, and I will add a cylinder. Turn that down to 8 vertices. It should be fine, since it is going to be subdivided. Cap fill type to triangle fan. Again, that just helps move it up just so that we can see. Scale that down a lot, of course. Going to face select mode. I will be removing these faces on the bottom. And now into edge mode, select this loop right here, do a 0.4, move that up. We don't want these buttons to be that tall. And now I will select this by pressing L, go into top view. I'll just move this by pressing G and Shift Z. I don't think you have to press Shift Z if you're into top view, but usually what that does is it constrains your movement to the Y and X axes. I just do that intuitively. Line that up with the picture, Shift D to duplicate, X to move it on the X-axis, and now L, have these 2 buttons selected, Shift D, and we will just rotate these along the center, R, Z, and now type in 90. Enter to confirm that, and we have our 4 buttons. We will just move them down to line up with the body of the controller. Select this edge, move it down into the body of the controller. I think we may have gone a little overboard with the curvature here. That's okay, we can still adjust this, right? Just select all these buttons by pressing L. Now hide them. I'm going to go into Shift Z, vertex select mode. I'm just going to select this side of the mesh and this side of the mesh, and I will just move them up. Holding Control, deselect just this row of vertices, do the same here, and move this up as well. And now if I press Alt H, yeah, you can see that the height difference between these buttons is not drastic. I think we might actually want to rotate this, so just select all the buttons, R and the Y to rotate on the Y axis, just give that, and just get it sort of like that. And I will essentially do the same thing for the other two buttons, just add a cylinder. The settings should carry over from before, so just select this vertex, remove it. This, I think we went with 0.4 once more. Move this up, L, Shift Z, line it up with the image in top view again, scale it down, and just move it down. Just Shift D and move it slightly. Take both of these, I think we can rotate them a little as well on the Y-axis, and maybe move them down. I'm reasonably satisfied with that. Now for the D-pad, we're actually going to need a cube, but if I add it, you can see that it shows up in the center of our scene. I want it to be positioned exactly in the center of this circle here. Our 3D cursor, indicated by this little circle right here with the crosshair, is positioned in the center of the scene, and we can very easily reposition it by just selecting this vertex in the middle, pressing Shift and S, and then dragging the mouse down here, cursor to selected. And as you can see, that is now there, and if I add a cube here, it now shows up perfectly in the middle. So I will scale this down. Shift H, I do want to remove again this face that is on the bottom. Alt H to show everything again, and now I want to extrude this out. But if I select all these faces, holding Alt again, and extrude them by pressing E, you can see that we have some issues here because Blender is treating this as essentially one cluster, which we don't want. We want to extrude these individually. First of all, just hide the subdivision modifier for a second. Maybe scale this down. Before I do this, I will press Alt E, and then it's gonna show me a menu for all the options I have for extrusions, and I will select extrude individual faces instead. And now if I drag my mouse out, you can see that we get the desired effect. Now if I go into top view, press Shift Z, you can see that this is just a little too big, and if I scale it down, you can see that the whole thing is shrunk, which I do not want. I want to preserve the proportions, so what I can do is press Alt and S instead, and this will allow me to shrink the whole thing essentially, and this also gives us a nice little concave shape here. I think the reason for that is actually the extrusion added, yes, the extrusion added these faces here as well, and we'll remove them as well. Pretty good. I will just move this up ever so slightly and maybe rotate it on the Y-axis. And now just show the subdivision surface modifier again. Keep all the edges selected, I think, and I will bump this up to a 0.4, even more, like a 0.5. You can see the D-pad and the buttons as well have the same issue we saw earlier. They do look a little chunky, because we need to reapply smooth shading. So just right click on this mesh again, shade auto smooth, and bump this up to a 45 degrees. And you have to do that every time you add a separate mesh to an object. For example, now we are going to model the joystick, and you will see that we run into the same issue. So I want to move the 3D cursor. I want it to be in between these two vertices. I will select them, and now Shift S, cursor to selected. Now I will add a circle this time. Vertices again, set that to 8, and fill type to triangle fan. And I will just move this up on the Y axis and scale it down again. I to inset, G and Z to move that up, I to inset again, just scale it down a bit and move it down. I will select this whole loop. I will go into edge select mode actually and select these edges going inside as well. And I will set the mean crease value to 0.4. Going to top view, I think this is way too wide, so I will select this edge and just scale it down. And I will actually add a loop cut going across here. Control R, left click, right click, and scale this up. Going to vertex select mode, and again we will move the 3D cursor to this part. Shift S cursor to selected, and I will add another circle and just scale it down a lot. Shift and Z to see what we are doing here. Now E to extrude this upwards. I will hide the subdivision modifier for a second. About this height, I think. Hide everything and delete this vertex. Now Alt A, select this loop, scale it down just to taper this off a bit. We could actually move it down into the object. And now we are going to make the cap. Select this set of faces here. E to extrude, move this up just a little bit. And now scale it up. Go to top view. Just make sure that the scale makes sense here. Now I to inset. Scale it down. G and Z, maybe scale it up a bit. See what that looks like with the subdivision modifier enabled. I will go into edge mode and I will set this to a 0.5, I think. This to a 0.4, or maybe a little less, like a 0.3. This loop right here, scale it up a bit. Maybe move this down. I think I might select this set of faces and inset this once. And now shade auto smooth. I will select both of these and rotate them on the x-axis just a little bit and then move them down so that they intersect with the controller. Now that I'm looking at this, I actually don't think the scale matches up here. Maybe just scale it up a little bit to be even lower than this. So yeah, just like make any final adjustments you want. If you still want to have, you know, mirrored inputs, you can just go up here and enable mesh symmetry. And now maybe the bumpers here, for example, sort of like this. I think that's the modeling portion basically finished. Maybe this should be moved down, but yeah, that's basically it. We're gonna move on to the shading now, so I'll just move into the shading workspace up here. It's gonna take a bit to load, I don't know why. And we're in material preview mode by default, which we want, but I will go up here and change the lighting environment to this, just because I like it a bit more. And one thing we actually have to do before we start working in here, I will go into the render settings over here on the right, and in color management you want view transform to be set to standard, because Filmic just makes everything look really washed out. We don't want that. Now, for some reason I don't seem to be able to get my inputs to display on this screen, so I apologize for that. Hide the overlays up here just because I don't want to see all that. With the controller selected, I will go down here, create a new material, and by default you can see we are set up with a principled BSDF material. And now this is pretty much everything you would need to set up a basic material if you wanted to make something realistic. You just basically change the color here, mess around with all these properties to get what you want. But I actually want to have a completely flat cell shaded look, so I'll just reset all this to default. This is fairly simple. The way I usually do this, and this is sort of a hacky way, you want to go into an image editor of your choice, set up a really small image with all the colors you need side by side. For the purpose of this, I set up an image that is 3 by 2 pixels, and each of them is a different color. And we can use that by just going in here, pressing Shift A, looking up image texture, press enter to confirm that. I will go into the folder where I left that image. And now if I plug this into the base color over here, you can see we get some very strange results. And now this is for a couple of different reasons. First of all, you want to disable the texture interpolation here, because this is just 6 pixels. It's gonna look really blurry. So go in here and change this from linear to closest, but we still need to map these colors to the different parts of the mesh. Just for a second, I will go into the UV editing workspace. Now usually if you're working with, you know, an actual more complex texture, you would have to unwrap this whole mesh and spend a really long time mapping this out, but because we've got just a couple of different colors, we can just select these different parts and match them up with the different sectors on the left. So I will go into material preview mode just to see what we're doing, and now I'm just basically going to be selecting the different parts of this by pressing L. And for example, I've got the main part of the controller right now. Just go here on the left, scale this whole thing down and move it into this gray color right here. This part and the D-pad, these two will be the darker shade of gray, so I will scale them down and move them up here. The joystick, that's the light gray we have up here. Now the C buttons, those go into the yellow section. The A button is down here, so that one is blue. And the B button, of course, goes here into the green section. And the L and R buttons as well as the Z, these three go into the darker gray. And so that's usually how I set up textures. You could just do this by, changing the base color in the shader here and setting up a couple of different shaders for each part of the controller. That's even more janky, I think. So that's what we're going with. Now what we're going to be doing essentially is putting this through like a threshold filter. First of all, we need to convert this material to an RGB value. Shift A and look up shader to RGB. Plug that in here. Now this doesn't have any visible effect, but we can now plug this into a color ramp. So now Shift A and color ramp. Plug this in here. And then what this does is it basically narrows down the values. I don't think you actually want to set it up this way. I will unplug this texture for a second and show this image over here on the left. Just zoom in on that. What I will do is take the base color here, take the eyedropper tool and pick this gray and just keep this image here. What you want to do is basically move these closer to each other to make the shadows look more flat. Sort of like this. If you want this to be completely posterized, you can change the type of interpolation here to constant, and that is going to just make the transition completely sharp. What I like to use is ease and just put that really close. And now I will not be using a completely black color here. I will go with a bit of a darker blue. Bump up the saturation on that, maybe the lightness a bit. Now we are going to be using this as basically sort of a shadow map. I'll probably be fiddling with this later on as well. And I encourage you to, just play around with this, see what you yourself like. But yeah, that looks pretty good to me. I am seeing some minor issues here. I think it might be the metallic value here. I will turn that down to 0, I think. And maybe turn up the roughness just a bit more. Even turn this up to 1, I suppose. But yeah, this is a pretty good look for me. I'm going to be using this texture down here as a base for our shader. So what I will do is actually get a mix node. We're going to be mixing these two together. Make sure that it's mix, not mix color or mix shader. Now change this from float to color, of course. And for mix, I'm going to pick overlay. I think that looks pretty good. You could go with multiply. And of course, remember to plug the result here into the surface node. And now just plug these colors here into A and B. I think this is the setup. The image texture goes into A and the color ramp goes into B. And now you can mess with these sliders some more so that you see what the whole thing looks like. I will turn up the lightness on this blue color here just so that we get a little more of that hue in the shadows. I like them to have a more purplish, cooler tone. Just a bit of context here. Up to this point, everything has been relatively straightforward, right? I show you a thing, you do the same thing. Now we're getting into what I call Bob Ross territory. So I'm going to be showing you the tools. I'm going to be showing you how I use them, but you shouldn't necessarily follow what I do one-to-one. Now, I am going to be displaying the color values in the subtitles in case you want to replicate the results for some reason. But, just go wild. Draw whatever you want here. Use whatever colors you want. And we are basically done with the shading part. Now we can get to the drawing, but before we do that, I will actually go into the layout mode. And of course, now that we've got the shader set up, we can just enable material preview, change the lighting environment. So here comes the fun part, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I will just center the camera on this by pressing the period key on my numpad. Add a new grease pencil object, make sure that's blank. I'm going to name that something like controller G. One fairly important thing here in the Objects tab, right here in the Visibility menu, I want to uncheck Use Light. I want the colors to be perfectly flat. To start drawing, I will press Control Tab and go into Draw mode. We are set up right now with one material, which is just a simple stroke here. I will create a new one. I'm going to name that Fill. Disable Stroke, Enable Fill, and we're going to be using these two throughout. So I'll just go back to the regular material, black, for a second. Change this mode to Vertex Colors because we're going to be using this palette. And now, instead of Origin up here, I want the stroke placement to be set to surface. And be very careful with what you set the offset to. You don't want to go too low because then the strokes will start intersecting with the mesh and create very unpleasant looking effects like this. Sometimes it might even only show up in the render for some reason. Let's just go with 0.005 for now. There are ways to adjust this later, but we don't want to be relying on them. Maybe just bump this up a bit more. How about 0.01? Oh, and by the way, I mentioned this briefly in the beginning, but if you run into the issue that at the start of the process you picked too low of a value for the offset between the stroke of grease pencil and the surface, and you render this out and you see the grease pencil object intersecting with the controller, quick and dirty fix for this is to go into the mesh, go into edit mode, select everything and press Alt S, and holding Shift just slightly shrink the whole thing and just render this out again and again until you get something. Now we want the strength to be 1. We'll just go into the Layers tab here. I will change the name of this one to Outline, and we are going to be working with that. The shading of this makes it really difficult to see sort of the contours of our mesh. So I will go into Viewport Shading and actually change the color to Texture. Now maybe we'll go with Matte Cap instead. Pick a material here that looks okay. And we'll just be flipping between these two to see. So what I like to do first with the outline, select a darker color. I do not like working with a pure black, so I will pick this color just from the viewport. Slide this down to a darker shade of gray. Maybe get something that is a little more of a blue purple hue, something like this. I will go into this mode now, and what I am going to do is just basically draw around the sharper edges of my mesh. I am using the mouse for this. You could of course use a drawing tablet. I have one. I just decided I want to make this look as accessible as it really is, because you really don't need a tablet when you're working in this sort of style. I am intentionally leaving gaps here just to make this seem a little more organic. If you want to erase something, you just hold Control, but as you can see, the eraser has sort of a gradual effect to it, so I do want to change that setting. And also, if you notice, the eraser works through the object, which we do not want, and we want it to be obstructed by visibility. So I will go into the eraser tool here, enable this setting that will occlude, and make sure that is set to point instead of dissolve, and this should work. And if you want to adjust this slightly, for example, I think this contour here is a little too far from the edge, you can go into sculpt mode and just make sure you have the grab tool F to change the size of your brush, and then you can just push these out. Just be careful because again this is not occluded, so I can accidentally push something that is behind the mesh, like this part here for example. And if you want to adjust the colors, you just go into vertex paint mode. So for example, I think I might want to go with a sort of more purplish color because I don't really like this dark gray. Maybe like a desaturated purple would be a better fit, and you paint it on. This might be a little too dark, I think. This looks like a pretty nice shade. Maybe desaturate it a little bit more, and it's too much. And when you're done with that part, you can start actually drawing out some of the details. So for example, this circle here where the D-pad is situated. So for this I will just use the circle tool, hold shift to preserve proportions, enter to confirm, and now I will just adjust it in the edit mode. So again, tab, I will select this by pressing L and just move this around. So to try to adjust this, and I'll go into draw mode and I will just erase parts of this, roughen it up, maybe draw some parts in manually just to make it seem, I don't know, handmade. And actually I didn't change the color. I will have to pick this, I think. And do the same thing with this part basically. I will do this on the flat part of the controller because otherwise it will sort of snap to the circle here. I will rotate this just to match it up, shift it around until it looks good. And again, do the same thing, just go into draw mode, make sure you've got the pencil selected and just erase. You can go outside of the circle a little here and there. Just experiment, see what works, what doesn't. Now I will go into top view because there is a detail that we did not model in that we should probably draw in, and that is this little part here where the Nintendo logo would be. I don't know why it's not here. I think I just downloaded an image of like a third-party controller or something. But yeah, you can just use the line tool if you want to keep this straight. Shift Z to see the reference image and, you know, just sort of try to match this up. And the thing about the line tool is it doesn't create a lot of geometry, so you're erasing bigger parts of the line. Now that we've done that, I will create a new layer. I'll name it something like detail, and now I will be drawing on all the other stuff. So, you know, maybe I will draw on the Nintendo logo up here. I don't think it looks like that, but whatever. Draw around all these buttons using the circle tool, make it look like they're sticking out of an actual hole in the controller. I don't think it actually has to be that big. If you want to decrease the thickness of a stroke, you can do it after the fact in edit mode by pressing Alt S or using this. So that's what I will do. I think I'll just scale this down by half. And now press S to move it more towards the circle. Maybe not half, maybe increase the size of this just a little bit again. So I will also decrease the thickness here. Like 13 pixels, I think. That's pretty reasonable. And we can actually just duplicate this circle and shift it across to the A button as well. And just remember to move this down and rotate it so that it matches up. I'll draw a separate circle for this now. Just make sure no part of this is going over the button or it will get drawn over it. It's actually a bit far away, the edge of this. This, I think. Enter to confirm. Shift D. And match these up again. Now we're going to do the same thing with the D-pad. I will just draw this on manually, I think. Okay, now I'm going to draw the outline of this part in a similar way. I will just go into solid view to see this a bit better, top view. Remember, the angle you draw this from actually matters in terms of where the strokes are placed. If I draw this from the top view, it looks fine. Something you have to keep in mind. I will draw the outline of this as well. I will actually reset the size of this to 20 pixels. I will just select these, move them down, scale them up. And you know what? I will actually want to go with different colors for this. Dark gray for this part. And I will also change the shade on the joystick itself to light gray. Go to draw mode, color pick this. So here I'm just holding shift to stabilize my stroke. Still doing this manually instead of using the circle tool, but you know, just keeping it a little smoother. And that looks hella janky. But I don't know, let's just chalk it up to a stylistic choice. And I mean, it's essentially the same for buttons, right? You just pick the color of the button, slide the value down a bit, maybe shift the hue to screen, outline it, draw in the B. Do the same with the A button, right? Just pick the color, shift the hue a bit. Very simple stuff. C buttons. Actually, I think I will just use the color from the palette here. Same thing with the D-pad. I'm going to pick the color we used on the base of the joystick, and first of all just draw in all the corners. Draw in the circle and the arrows for all four directions. Maybe I will draw in a couple of lines here just to indicate the shape of this a bit more. We will do the same thing for the L and R buttons now. Hide the reference image for this. We're going to do the same thing for the Z button. So another thing we will do is add another layer below all the ones we currently have. We will name this one Shadow. And despite the fact that we already have some shading going on, I do like to draw in some more stylized shadows here and there. And we will be using the other material we set up at the beginning for this. So just change this to fill. And we are going to color pick the shade. As you can see, I am now drawing in filled shapes. Maybe add some shade to this part. This part appears to be clipping, so I will just move it up slightly. Same with this. Maybe scale that down on the Z-axis just to flatten it out. And now I will do the same, just on the individual buttons. So I will color pick this shade, for example. Go into top view and just draw in sort of a semicircle. And do the same with the A button. The C buttons, of course. As well as the D-pad. I will actually draw in a circle just here. Select it in edit mode, scale it down on the Z-axis to 0, and I will position it down here. I will just draw in some of this as well. Seems to be clipping a little, so I will just move it out. I will actually, I think, scale these down and move them. We can move on, and I will create another layer just above this one, and we'll name this one Highlights. And now for this we will be using just one color, a very bright shade of yellow, almost white, and I will be using the black material we have set up here to just create some highlights on some of these buttons. For example, inside these arrows, maybe highlighting the legends on the buttons. Maybe do the same thing up here, why not? And then on the opposite side of this, in the corners here, maybe on the joystick as well. Again, just experiment with this, see what looks good to you. One more thing we will add here is in the outline tab, maybe the detail tab actually, I will pick the color we used for the outlines and I will just draw across essentially the central part of the controller. This is where the seam would be, where the two different molds of plastic intersect, right? And then just to give this some depth, I will go into the highlights layer. I will pick the main color here and I will paint just above our seam here, and this will give it some actual depth. Oh damn it, I forgot the start button, of course, Jesus. Right, let's go into the outline tab here. Let's show the reference image again. Can't believe I forgot the start button. I will pick this shade, I think. Just create a circle here. Line this up. I'm actually going to duplicate this here. Move it across, Shift Z, SZ0, just to flatten it. We're essentially going to be doing the same thing we did with the other buttons, but this time on a flat surface. I will erase some parts of this with the same color. I will go just right in Start. Okay. And I will pick a brighter shade of red. Maybe move into the pink a little bit. Brighten that up. I think this is a pretty nice shade. Pick the fill material again and just, you know, paint across this. And I will move this below all the other stuff. Just in edit mode, arrange, and send to back. Although I think we would have to move this to the shadow layer. I should probably just create another layer for this. Now, darken this a bit. Move the shade towards the blue again. A shadow right here. That, I do not like that. Okay, perhaps this is a more fitting shade. I go to the highlights layer again. Top view. I want to be using the black material. I think I mentioned this in the last video, but if I want to draw under an existing stroke, I just enable this. And for example, I'm in the highlights layer. Say I want to draw the base color below the B, but also not go over the existing highlights, like that. That's how it works. Yeah, so there are two little details that I forgot about here that I only add at the very end of the video. There are two little lines here connecting these two buttons, and also a little circle around the C button cluster with the letter C in the middle. So I just drew that in on the detail layer, and I added in a shadow in the C circle, and I added in some highlights as well. I thought I should mention that. And the last thing I'm going to do here is a 3D outline surrounding the controller. Now, there are two main ways to do this that I'm aware of. One of them is using freestyle in post-processing. I don't really like that method for a bunch of reasons. Another method is to use the solidify modifier and flip the normals of the object, basically making it so that you only see the inside of it. And we're going to be using that, but we're not going to be using the solidify modifier because I don't want the subdivided mesh to be duplicated. Instead, I will just pick the controller, Shift D, I will duplicate the entire thing, and I will get rid of the subdivision modifier right here. I will just modify this a little so that it looks more natural. I'll remove basically all the elements that are not part of the main body. I will select everything in edit mode, Alt S. I will scale this up. Go into the material tab. We're going to make a new material. We're not going to use this one. Add a slot, add a new material right here. I'm going to call this outline. Remove this one. We need to get out of edit mode for this one. Remove this one. And I will change the surface from principled to emission. We don't have to even go into the shader editor for this. Keep the strength at 1. And now I'm going to go back into edit mode. I will go into mesh, normals, and flip. Flipping the direction of every face on the mesh. Now you can't really see the effects of that yet because by default Blender draws both sides of a face. But down here in the settings you can see I can enable backface culling. And we will just change the color to the one we used to draw the outlines. One more thing I might do here is just merge these vertices to make the surface of this smoother. Just select 2 vertices, M, and then at center. And you can mess around with the shape of this. That's one of the advantages of doing this manually instead of with the solidify modifier. As basically the controller done, you could just take this, set it up on a flat background, make a turnaround animation, post it on Instagram. But we're going to be doing something a little more interesting. I want to create a full composition of this. So a good place to start here would be a sketch, I suppose. Draw it out to figure out the composition before you actually start working. But I've already tried to film this like 7 times or so, so I have a pretty good idea of what I'm going for here. But what I will do actually is just add a camera and try to position it. Working with cameras inside Blender is quite simple. Through the lens of the camera, just press 0 on the numpad. You can move it around like a normal object in whatever view. Control Alt and 0, that positions the camera wherever your view is. Over here on the right you have all the settings you would need. I'm just going to change the focal length for now to, let's say, 35mm. Pretty simple way to move this around. Shift tilde, and now I can just use WASD. It's pretty fiddly. I don't actually use this. As I said, you can just move this around like a normal object. And if you want to snap this to an axis, a very useful thing is if you press any of the letters twice, you can actually reposition this on a local axis instead of the global one. And this doesn't change no matter how you rotate or position the camera. So for example, if I want to move the camera up, I would be using G and Z, but if I rotate the camera and I want to move it on this axis, press Y twice to move it on the local Y axis up like that. If I want to move it back, I just press Z twice, so on and so forth. So yeah, I'll just position this roughly in relation to the grid floor. You can also enable composition guides in the menu and right here in viewport display. I like to use the rule of thirds sometimes. And one thing we're going to be doing a lot here is actually repositioning the controller, which is a bit of a problem because it's broken up into 3 parts: the grease pencil object, the outline, and the actual mesh. Now the outline and mesh we could technically merge into one object by pressing Ctrl J, but we don't want to be using the subdivision modifier, as I said, and the grease pencil object cannot be merged. How do we make it so that I don't have to select all 3 objects anytime I want to move them around? Constraints. Now constraints are a very useful part of Blender. You can use them for a number of things, but right now we'll just constrain basically all 3 objects together. So the easiest one to select here I think is the outline. First of all, why is this not named? We gotta name this fucking thing. Outline, thank you very much. Select the controller, and now I will go into the constraints tab right here, add object constraint. I'm going to select copy transforms. This is going to be copying the scale, rotation, and location of the outline. In the target, I just select outline, make sure that's set to replace, the target set to world space, as well as the owner. I'm going to do the same thing for the grease pencil object. Just select that, copy transforms, target, outline. Now if you see something like this happening, don't panic, okay? This is a very simple fix. Basically, every object in Blender is oriented in two separate sets of coordinates, right? And this is what I was talking about when I mentioned double-clicking the letters when I was moving the camera. When you move an object around in object mode, that changes its position in the world, right? But if I go into edit mode and I select all the geometry and I move it around, that changes its position locally. You can see this little orange point right here, that's the object origin. If I move it around in object mode, that is repositioned. So what I did before is I moved the grease pencil object probably into this position, changing its origin point, which is why these are misaligned. You can see the origin point of the grease pencil object is right here, but the origin point of both the outline and the controller are right here. You can apply the position in the world space as a position in the local space by just pressing Ctrl A and applying all transforms, and you can see location, rotation, scale, everything is now basically inherent to this object. Now be careful when doing it, because if I, for example, scale an object up and I want to reset its scale, I can do that very simply by pressing Alt and S. Same with rotation, Alt and R, or location, Alt and G. But once you apply any one of these properties, you cannot change them. But as you can see, if I now add the copy transforms constraint, change the target to outline again, everything works fine. So now I will go into camera view and I will just tilt this controller, reposition the camera. I want this controller to be sort of in the left half of the frame. I want the focal point to be in the lower third. So what I want in the scene is a controller that is half submerged, an old tiled floor covered in mud. So we're going to work on that bottom first. I'm going to add a simple plane. I'm just going to move it down right around where the bottom of the controller is. Now we're going to edit mode. I will scale this up from camera view to make sure that it reaches the edge of the frame. And it doesn't have to go around the whole scene. Clip it like that. We're only going to be seeing this thing from one angle, so you don't want to be spending additional time on something that is never going to be seen. Now that we've got this plane here, I want this terrain to be sort of uneven. So I'm going to subdivide this, but I'm not going to use the subdivision surface modifier. I'm just going to subdivide it in edit mode. Right click, subdivide. I'm going to slide this up to 10. And I'm going to do that one more time, slide this up to like 3 or 4 this time. I think this should be okay. And now I'm just going to go into the sculpting workspace right here. And I'm going to be going super in depth on this, but I will just be using the inflate brush to create a little bit of complexity in the terrain, and holding down Control to deflate. And we do want some parts of it to be deflated because those are going to be the points where we see the tiled floor. And in the edges of the frame, I do want these to be above the visible space. Go back to layout, change the shading of this to smooth. Actually, I want to get rid of this grid on screen because it's annoying. I'm going to go into overlays. I'm going to disable floor and the axis. Because this is completely flat, I will just use a grease pencil object, create a blank object, and then move this down so that the origin point is a little below the plane of mud. Actually, I will name this right now. And now I can go to draw mode. Instead of surface, I'll choose origin, and because we want this to be completely flat, here instead of view, I will go with top. In the materials tab, I want this to be using the same fill material we made for the other object. I want this to be sort of a white, maybe brown color. We can always change this later. And I will just use the square tool to roughly draw over this area. And now in object mode, we can just adjust this. And we can select the mud again, go into sculpt mode and, adjust this a little more now that we know exactly where the tiles will be. Now we want to add some color to this. A pretty tough thing to do with grease pencil because the terrain is so uneven. So I think we will just texture this. And luckily we don't have to do any UV editing on this because it is just a flat plane. You can see if I go into the UV editing tab, it is perfectly unwrapped for us here. So you can just go straight into the texture painting workspace. Now here's the thing, Blender's texture painting is probably the worst part of the software right now. No layers, one brush, nothing. So preferably what you would do is you would just draw something up in Photoshop and then open it up here like we did with the texture for the controller. But for the sake of this video, I will just show you how to use this. First of all, we need to create a material for this that actually uses an image, because right now the surface is just completely white, right? So I will go into the shading workspace, I will click new, I'm going to name this mud again, get rid of this principled shit, we don't need it. I'll just go in with a diffuse shader, much simpler stuff, bump up the roughness all the way up, and now instead of the color, again we're going to be using an image texture. So just plug this in here, we have a new button. We can create an image in Blender. That's what we're going to do. Click on this, you can select the resolution you want here. I'm going to go with a 2048 by 2048 image. The color doesn't matter, we don't need an alpha channel. I'm going to name this mud. I'm going to click OK. And now if I go into the texture painting workspace, I can start painting on this. Now, a very, very annoying thing about the texture editor in Blender is that you have to save the image separately from the file. And I often forget to do this, meaning the next time I open the file, the texture is nowhere to be seen and I have to start all over again. So this is a very simple thing, don't forget to do it. When you close the program, Blender usually asks you if you want to save the image separately, but you can just go up here, image, save as, and just put this in a folder somewhere. If you press Ctrl S, that doesn't save it, that only saves the file. You actually have to be, first of all, in the window that has the image open, and you have to press Alt S instead for some reason. I don't know why, but this is just how it works. So first of all, we need a base color for this. I'm just going to use the fill tool. We're going to get rid of the overlay. I don't need this grid right here, and I don't need it here either. I'm going to pick some nice color, like a darker shade of brown, maybe very desaturated. I want this to be cooler, purple-ish tone, maybe a bit more red, sort of like this. I will go into the material preview mode. I'm gonna pick the brush, and again, I'm using a mouse for this, so I don't have any control over the radius of it. Ideally, if I were working with a tablet right now, I'd just enable this, but we can work with this stylistically. One thing I will do is adjust the fall off of this because this brush is very soft. I do not like the look of this at all. I will go in here, move this up, move this down all the way. Just make the fall off like extremely sharp. Something like this, I think. So one thing you will notice, you can paint on either of these screens, but on this one, zooming in or out does not change the size of your brush. So if I'm really far out, I place down a stroke, it's going to draw over the whole image. But if you're really close, you're drawing smaller circles. We're going to be using that to our advantage here stylistically. So what I'm going to do is essentially just add some color variation to this, right? I'm going to pick the same color I used for this. I'm going to make it a bit darker. Maybe shift the hue a little bit, and I will just zoom in and out, painting in blobs of color here and there. You know, first starting with bigger ones and then moving on to the smaller. And I will try to do this all around, snapping into camera view from time to time just to see what it will look like once it's finished. I'm especially paying attention to the edges around the tiled floor parts. And once I'm done with that, I'll move into another shade and paint this around here and there as well. Maybe go something brighter. Turn down the strength, make a 0.3, and just paint this around here and there. Purplish shade, change the blending style to overlay, and then just paint this around. Have like an illusion of some shade under the controller. I'll pick a grey color. I'm gonna take a green shade, sort of going into blue, quite dark, something like this. I think paying attention to the edges of this, I don't want them to be perfectly round. So I'm adding some variation to the edges here, just by, you know, painting in individual circles. Check what it looks like from the camera view. You know, at any point, if you don't like how some of this terrain looks, you can still go back into sculpt mode and change it. I'm going to do the same thing I did with the mud, go for a more bluish color, darken this a bit, and add some variation to this. I'm picking another color, this one brighter and a bit warmer. It's quite a bit too bright, I think. And now we can move on. We'll move this up just a little bit because it seems like the controller is actually floating in midair. Finish what we started here with the tiled floor. First thing, go to the layers tab. I'm going to name this layer just tiles, maybe. And I will pick the line tool. I want the black material we had set up on the other object, so that's what I will get in here. And set the color to black as well. Then I will create a new layer above this one. Tiles 2, maybe, why not? Pick the line tool, remember to disable this. And now I'm just going to be going over, creating parallel lines. And the cool thing about this is because this is higher in the layer stack, you can actually just put this below the other object and it should still get rendered above it. because we do not want this to be going over the mud. Perpendicular lines here, turn this into a grid pattern. I will invert this selection. I'll move these down as well. Should have done this in one go, but whatever. Now I'm going to be using the fill material to, well, fill in the corners here. So I will just use the box tool, create a square. I'm going to edit mode, rotate it on the Z-axis. Try to line this up with the center of this. Scale that down maybe just a little bit. Make sure that's at about the same height. And now we're just going to be duplicating it across this whole surface. Just sort of messing around with the scale and rotation as we go. Let's get these to look a little less flat. I'm going to go back to the black material. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to name this one something like highlights. I want this to be below tiles 2. I'm going to try to pick a nice bright color, maybe just white, slightly darker, like a light grey. And now I am going to turn the radius up, maybe like a 40 pixels. And I'm just going to be drawing lines here and there to sort of imply some reflectivity. I'm going to go into the materials tab again. I'm going to add a new material, slot, select fill. Again, I'm going to click on this to add a new material, duplicate this one. I'm going to name this one gradient, and here in the fill tab, instead of solid, that's what I'm going to go with, gradient. And what I want is to make the base color completely transparent. So I'm going to go in here and turn the alpha down to 0, and also turn the alpha down on this a little. And I'm just going to be going over creating these small reflections here and there. Maybe like add some scratches. One last thing here. I think the transition between the mud and the tiled floor is a little bit too sharp, so I'm going to add one more layer on top of this. I'm going to name this mud, go back to the fill, and I'm just going to pick the color of this from the screen and sort of adding some shapes here and there just to make this transition seem a little more organic. You can hold shift while you're doing this just to smooth out your strokes a little bit. And here in this part you can see that the brown has a different shade. I'll just switch to the secondary color and I'll pick this instead. And if I go back into the camera view, you can see that some of this is actually floating above the rest of the layers. Again, this is because the origin point is positioned a little too high. I will go back into edit mode, lock all the layers except for this one, and I will move it down just so that it's about at the same height. I'm pretty satisfied with that. Go back into layer mode now. You can make the water, and we're going to make this in a similar way we did the tiles. I'm going to add a new grease pencil object. I'm going to name this water. I'm going to make sure we've got the same materials here that we did before. And the black material, and I want the gradient material. Now, first of all, I'm going to duplicate this gradient material because we want to modify it. Go down here into the settings. First of all, I'm going to bump the alpha up to 1. I do not want these to be transparent. Sort of a dark blue greenish color, maybe something like this. And for the secondary color, I will go with something similar, more brown, yellow. Now in draw mode, we're actually going to change the color mode to material. I'm not going to be using vertex colors for this. I'm just going to paint a rectangle above all this. I'm going to edit mode, select this. I'm going to translate this gradient here. I'm going to scale it up just to make the transition a bit more smooth. And I'm going to rotate it around, maybe move the transition point a little closer towards the camera, like this. I'm going to go into object mode. I'm actually going to move this whole object down to about this level. I want part of the controller to be submerged, maybe a bit lower. And now I'm going to go into the data panel, rename this layer to water 1. I'm going to change the blend mode to add. First of all, I forgot to uncheck use lights. Now I'm going to duplicate this and change this layer's mode to multiply. Rename this to water 2. And I actually want the add layer to be above. And now we can mess around with the opacity of these two layers. If you want to, you can still mess around with the colors of this gradient. If you want something brighter, perhaps. Maybe something that looks a little more clean. I'm reasonably satisfied with this, I would say. I might mess around with the position of this controller just so that more of the front is showing. And you can still select this whole thing, reposition it however you like. I don't think I like the way these tiles in the background are sort of tangentially in contact with the contour of the controller, so I will rotate this whole thing. We're going to try to make the surface of the water look a little more lively. So I'm going to go into top view, go into draw mode. I'm actually going to add in the fill material we were using before. I'm going to use that to add some effects to this. Add another layer, call this, I don't know, just call this effects. And I'm going to be using the vertex colors for this. I want sort of a bright, warm tone. Change the blend mode to hard light. And I'm just going to be drawing in some circles around here on the surface of the water. I'm going to turn the opacity on this way down. 0.15 seems to be pretty reasonable. I might reposition some of these from the camera view. I'm going to be adding some, I don't know what you call this, like surface tension around where the controller is submerged. I'll just call this layer FX2. In draw mode, I'm going to use the black material, and I'm going to be using a shade that is similar in tone to the color of the water, just a lot brighter. And I'm just going to be drawing around. Actually, I'll disable this setting in the eraser for this because we're drawing inside the 3D outline, so that causes some issues. Just draw around the parts where the controller is submerged. I'm going to make another layer. I'm going to call this one highlights, and I'm just going to go over the same color we were using for the highlights and the controller, and I'm going to be going over this part again, maybe a little further away. I'm going to do another thing here. I'm going to pick the gradient material for this. I'm going to add another layer. I'm going to call this one, I don't know, reflection, something like that. And I'm just going to draw big sweeping shapes like this. I'm going to change the mode of this layer to add. I'm going to turn the opacity down a little, so like a 0.3. I'm going to edit mode. I'm going to select these two and I'm going to rotate them. We don't want these intersecting with the mud. Maybe something like that. You turn the opacity down a bit more, 0.07. These are actually floating above the water right now, but it doesn't matter. I want to go in maybe with a darker shade to sort of balance this out in certain spots. Good, some texture, you know. Mess around with it, see what works, what doesn't. I still think there is something missing here. Maybe if we added some leaves or debris floating on the surface of the water. Add another layer here, call this debris. I'm gonna pick dark red, a little less saturated perhaps. This seems like a much better shade. And I'll just draw in a couple of triangles floating on the surface. Maybe move this one a bit. Actually, now that I'm looking at this, I think these two layers I have strokes with a little too much thickness, so I will select these and just turn that down a little bit. And you might want to take this color again and maybe paint some of these around the leaves as well. Now here's a cool idea. What if we took the debris layer, duplicated it, put it all the way below all the other layers, name it shadow. I'm going to edit mode, select all this and move it down below the surface, turn down the opacity and change the blend mode to multiply. But we still need to fill in some of this frame. I think I might actually go into the cameras and maybe zoom this in a bit more. Maybe rotate it upwards a bit. I'm actually going to add a new grease pencil object, blank. I'm going to name this FG for foreground. I'm going to name this layer leaves or something like that. I'm going to move this in object mode so that the origin point is just in front of the camera. I'm going to go into camera view, go into draw mode, change the drawing plane from top to view, keep that set to origin point. Go into the materials, select the fill material here, draw in some leaves sticking out in the foreground, sort of as if the camera is hidden in a bush or something like that. I will go into vertex paint mode and I think I will darken these a little, just because we didn't want them taken away from the focal point. Maybe these should be a bit more of a warm tone, floating around in the water. Add another layer below this one, called leaves 2 maybe. Not particularly creative when it comes to naming layers. I'm gonna pick a much brighter tone this time, maybe a bit more green as well. Maybe I would scale these up a little individually. I'll actually go into edit mode. I will change the transform pivot point to individual origins and just scale that up ever so slightly. Change this back to median point. Remember to uncheck use lights in the object tab. But now if I go into render view, you can see that we are seeing some issues. And this is for a very simple reason. There is no actual lighting in this scene. You see the material preview mode uses a lighting environment, which we do not have set up in the render. There are two basic approaches to lighting in Blender. Doing it manually, Shift A, light, and adding some sort of light source to the scene. For example, you could go with just a sun, brighter color, bump up the strength, rotate it to change up the angle, maybe add in some area lights here and there. Or perhaps the better one, you use an HDRI texture, which is exactly what is going on in the material preview mode. Now for some reason, I don't think there's actually a setting in Blender that allows you to use this lighting setup. I don't know why that is, but the way this works essentially is you go into the shader editor here and you change this from object to world, and now instead of this gray color that we're using here right now, we want to plug in an environment texture, essentially an image that is going to be used as the lighting environment. And now you can find these somewhere in the Blender files, or you can go on HDRIhaven.com, which is originally where these images are from, which is what I did. I'm going to leave a link to that in the description below, and you just find that, select it, and you have your lighting environment. And it seems like I forgot to disable use lights on this object. Okay, so now that that is fixed, you can render this out, see what it will look like. And if you just did what I did, you will see some very strange results, because what is happening here is all the grease pencil objects that we have in the scene are getting rendered on top. And the way to fix that is to enable a certain path in the render settings right here under view layer. You go into passes, data, and you click on Z. It should look how it's supposed to. Now we're not done quite yet. I think there are still a couple of things we could do here to make this look more interesting. And we are going to be making use of effects and modifiers for grease pencil objects. Now the first thing I like to do, add a little bit of glow to the brightest highlights. There is a very simple way to do this. You just go into the effects tab, add effect, and select glow. And this might look a little chunky. You just bump up the samples to like 12 or 16. You want the threshold to be relatively high so that it only picks up the brightest colors. I want the size of this to be a little smaller, maybe like a 30. I want the glow color to be a little warmer than this. You can copy effects between your objects. You're selecting two of them like this. First select the one without the effect, and then select the one that has the effect. Press Ctrl L and select Copy Grease Pencil Effects. Now the second thing I'm going to do is add a blur effect to the leaves in the foreground. Bump up the samples to 12 here as well. And I'm going to turn down the size on both the X and Y axes. And I'm also going to add the same blur to the tile floor in the background here, even though that will blur the tiles in the foreground as well. You might still want to mess around with the camera a little bit. I do, for example. I think the controller is taking up a little too much of the frame here. So I will try my best to adjust this. Maybe change the geometry of this a little. I do not want that part to be sticking out of the water. And maybe spread these leaves around the scene a little more organically. You know, I might want to get rid of that in its entirety actually. Just, you know, adjusting details at this point. Maybe move this leaf as well. And once we render this out, we can add some more finishing touches in the Compositing tab. And here, I just like to adjust colors. So first of all, to enable compositing, I need to go in here and click on Use Nodes. And now to see what we are actually working on, I will add a viewer node, and this will put our final image in the background. If you have this node selected, you can adjust the position and scale of this. And just remember to plug this into the composite node at the end. And now I like to just go into the color tab here, get a color balance node, plug this in. And now the lens distortion, very simple, just Shift A, type in lens distortion, plug this in, and bump up the distort. It's very easy to go overboard with this effect. I like to go for like a 0.5, select fit so that it crops the image. I like to add a bit of jitter, some dispersion. Now the dispersion particularly easy to go overboard with, and I do want to keep this somewhat subtle. I do love this effect though, so this might be too over the top for your taste. Actually, I think this might look more pleasant with a warmer tone. Maybe I'll go back here and adjust this a little. I'll just push all this right back. I think that's good. One very cool thing about grease pencil, and this is something that you can utilize even in, you know, less stylized environments. You can actually retouch certain parts of your scene that you may not like. For example, I think the way the 3D outline looks here, where the controller is submerged underwater, and here looks a little janky. So, you know, I can just add a grease pencil object, call it something like, I don't know, fix, get the fill tool, just move this out a little bit so that it's in front of the controller, get into camera view, and just from this view, in draw mode, set this to origin, set this to view, pick the color of the outline, and you can just of course you do have to uncheck ease lights for it to actually function properly. BBBBONUS. So this looks cool and all if you just want an image out of this, but what if we gave some life to this? What if we made a little video out of it without having to do any manual animation, just using a couple of basic modifiers? First of all, grease pencil objects exist from the frame they were drawn on, and for some reason my timeline is on the 9th frame. I must have clicked on this at some point and not realized it, but you can see that if I pull this back, all of our stuff starts disappearing, so we have to fix that. In object mode, I'm just going to select everything by pressing A, select the keyframes down here, G, and just move all of them to the first frame. Now you can see there are a couple of keyframes here that we cannot move, and this is because you can't move keyframes on locked layers, so we do have to go in and unlock these individually. But once you've done that and moved all this back, you can see from the very first frame we have all of our stuff here. Now what I'm going to do is very simple. I'm just going to go around all the grease pencil objects and I'm going to be adding a noise modifier to each of them. Now what the noise modifier does is basically distorts the whole grease pencil object, as you can see here. But what's very fun about this is if I press play, you can see that it gets randomized every couple of frames. Now obviously the effect here is a little too strong, so we do want to scale this back quite a bit. We want the effect to be extremely subtle. 0.015 I think would work relatively well for the controller, and we can also turn up the scale to maybe like a 0.5. You can mess around with all these properties to see what works for you. Now I'm going to select the water, and I'm actually going to go with something a bit stronger here, I think. Not quite a 0.5, or maybe like a 0.2 could be nice. And I might even randomize the thickness and strength of these strokes just a little. Could give us a nice effect, but it is looking a little too jittery for my taste. So in randomize down here, I will increase the steps to maybe like a 10, and this specifies the number of frames it takes for the noise pattern to be randomized. And I will do the same with the leaves. Turn the scale up just a little bit. Turn the scale down to maybe like a 0.1, maybe even less than that, 0.05, something like this. And we will change the steps here to 10 as well. And also do the same with the tiled floor. Now this one here, I will actually turn up the position to maybe like a 0.3, but still change the steps to 10. And this will sort of look like it's refracting underwater. Maybe not a 0.3, 0.15. I need to export this. I want a relatively short clip. Now I think we're working with 24 frames per second here, right? So I will change the endpoint here to 48. I want 48 frames of animation. So that should be 2 seconds. And it's looping perfectly, which is great. But it's still looking a little dead in my opinion. Now the great thing about Blender is you can keyframe essentially anything, right? Any property, any object, you can just right click on it, insert keyframes and animate it. So what I want to do here is get some subtle movement to the camera, and I'm going to do this procedurally. So I'm just going to select the camera, press I to insert a new keyframe. I'm going to select location here, and I'm going to move to the end of my animation, and I'm going to do the same thing again. So I'm keyframing the same position in both frames here. Right, now I will move this up. What I'm going to do is change this dock here from a timeline to a graph editor. I will pull up the properties we just keyframed. So the object location on the X, Y, and Z axis. You can see here they are split into 3 different categories. I'll just expand this window here. You can select one of these functions here. You can see that it's a straight line right now. So there are no changes in the position from the first frame to the 48th frame. And we can mess around with this, you know, as a curve manually. Or we can go into the modifiers tab and add a noise modifier here as well. And now if I play this back, you can see we have some procedural noise applied to the location of the camera. The effect is a little strong, right? So what we want to do is first of all turn up the scale and turn down the strength. We want the strength to be tiny, barely noticeable, right? I have the scale set to 5 and I will turn the strength down 0.01. And now I will just copy this modifier using this button. I will select the X location as well, and I will just paste that same modifier in. Do the same with the Y location, and now you can see we have some very subtle movement. Actually, maybe I'll also turn the depth up a little to get some resolution, maybe like a 25. Right, and now if I want to render out this video, I just go up here and click render animation. Except if I do that, first of all, I'm never going to find the file. Second of all, it's going to be in some weird format. So we got to adjust that. I'm going to go into the output tab here on the right. I'm going to move down and change the output folder to whatever I want to get the video. And now I'm going to change the file format from PNG to an actual video format. Now if you want this in MP4, you just go with FFmpeg video, go into encoding and change the container to MPEG-4, and then mess around with these settings down here to get a nice looking image. But I'm just going to go with AVI RAW since I don't want this to be compressed at all, and it is just a 2-second video, so the file size is not going to be that massive. And now I can just go up here, click render, and wait maybe a couple of minutes, and I'm going to see the video in the folder I specified.